Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today I'm going to be running through my March wrap-up for the horror challenge. From my graphic that I'll put up on the screen here, I'm continuing in the paranormal section. So January, I completed Ghost and Spirit. February was Haunted House, and for March, we focused on Possession. Just a little reminder, this is a mixture of books and movies, both new for me, and then I'll make recommendations for each. I read a total of 5 books, so let's get into them. First was The Rite by Matt Blasio, which is an investigative look into exorcisms by the church, and follows Father Gary Thomas as he, begins his journey of becoming an ordained exorcist. This is actually a nonfiction book, which I didn't really realize when I first picked this up. And I say this because I think that actually affected my rating a little bit. I'm not religious at all. So this was pretty interesting in the sense of how, the church views exorcists and exorcisms, which is obviously so against, what we see in fictional books and movies. The trouble that I had with this, which is ironically kind of also what fascinates me about possession in general, and that's diagnosing and, really determining what's possession and what's mental health. This book really drives home and makes it a point to say that this specific thing is a big topic for them, and they bring in psychologists to first interview their clients to determine if it is something mental, or if they're cleared to start thinking and talking about performing an exorcism. And while I appreciate this sentiment, a couple of the examples just seemed so hypocritical and like they completely missed the point. And for example, at one point in the book, there's a woman who has come to them and claiming that she needs an exorcism. And the church, refers her to a psychologist, and, the psychologist ends up basically saying, like, yeah, there's nothing for me to help her with. Like, I don't think it's a mental thing. She's good. The church is good to move forward with whatever they're going to do. But the woman, comes out and says that her father abused her as a child. And, that's why she has this demon now. And with that kind of confession, I just have such a hard time believing that any psychologist would be like, nah, she's good. There's nothing I can help her with. They make it a point to say that they use these resources, but yet still can't recognize when someone needs non-church help. Another example that I just had to laugh at was when they went to visit someone in their home, and the priest talked about how, just in that visit, he, knew something was wrong and there was a demon there. And, and he got that sense when he saw plastic on the furniture. Oh no, plastic furniture, she's possessed. It just seems kind of, I don't know, there's another example of a kid talking about how he's, thinking of suicide, and it's like, oh, I need to rid him of this demon. The psychologist is like, yeah, he needs help. Like that's mental health stuff. I have a hard time with that. So anyways, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. And, despite all that stuff that I didn't like, they actually talked about, performing exorcisms, and that in itself was pretty interesting. And they kind of, it's almost like treated like there's a waiting room of people like waiting to get an exorcism done. And it's, there's these priests that just like, that's all they do. Like, and it's, of course, not all of them are these big elaborate things that the books and the movies make them out to be, but there were some stuff that, they experienced, which is still pretty creepy. So, I enjoyed those parts, but all in all, knowing that this was a nonfiction, some of the stuff just rubbed me the wrong way, so. Next is A Good and Happy Child by Justin Evans, which is about George, who looks back at his childhood and memories and events that have taken place in which he believes that he was possessed. So, again, this was an okay book for me. George is having some trouble in his adult life, and that's what is kind of causing him to revisit memories and events from his childhood. This was actually kind of painful to read. You realize how alone someone must feel thinking that there's something wrong with them, but no one believes you, and even your own parents, who are supposed to be that protector, that helper, that, that safe association, just kind of want to ignore it and just refuse to get you any help. So this was almost more like a coming of age story, and I felt like there was still a piece missing that kind of gapped the child George with the adult George. The way the book ends, it kind of ends at a crucial point in his child life, but I feel like I still don't understand how we got from that kind of ending in his childhood to where he's at in his adult life. But I will say the end did catch me off guard, and I'm still trying to process and understand it, and it's kind of something that makes you think a little bit and kind of revisit some of the stuff that you've read earlier in the book and, look for signs and stuff. So that was an interesting end. Next is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro, which is about a group of friends who kind of are hanging out one night and decide to hold a seance, and one of the group members ends up getting possessed by an Aztec god. This was great and my favorite of the possession books that I read this month. On a review on Goodreads, I read someone said it was like The Craft meets Jennifer's Body, and that is such an accurate description. The possession scenes were pretty crazy. The sex and cannibalistic nature kind of makes for one hell of a ride. And the group of friends was a good dynamic. They're really pulling for their friend, trying to help her out. And I thought the possession of a god as opposed to like a devil or demon like we usually see was an interesting perspective. So that was kind of cool. Come Closer by Sarah Gran is about Amanda, who slowly starts to realize that she's being possessed. This book is about how things can go horribly wrong and start to fall apart. This was a short read, and, we basically followed Amanda come to this realization and kind of watch as her life starts to fall apart. But we never got any real solution to her problem, which kind of left this open ending, which I actually didn't mind. I felt like that was okay. It was an interesting perspective for a possession book to not have any talk of needing an exorcism or like any scenes of the exorcism being performed. Like the real horror of this book is just realizing that you're no longer in control and there's really nothing you can do as your life starts to fall apart. So that was pretty interesting. And lastly, I read The Good Demon by Jimmy Kajolis, which is about Claire, who has received an exorcism and is no longer with her demon. But after she feels more alone than ever and like a piece of her is missing and she wants her demon back. So this being set after an exorcism made this an interesting perspective for a book. You know, most of the time, especially in movies, it kind of ends after that exorcism is performed. There's no like follow up on how they're doing or anything like that. With that being said, I thought this was just an okay book. Claire talks a lot about being alone. You know, that's a really common theme throughout the book. And one of the main reasons she misses her demon, you know, that demon was kind of like having a good friend around when there was no one else. So most of the book is kind of her making a new friend now that she doesn't have her demon, and flashbacks to, you know, having that friend around. And of course there's a really good ending scene, but it took a while to get there. I was kind of hoping and wanting more of that early on in the book. So that was kind of a bummer. And side note, I do really love this cover. It's pretty awesome. So that's it for the books I read. Let's talk about the possession movies I watched. The Evil Dead is about a group of friends who decide to rent a cabin in the woods for a fun getaway. They find an old book, which they decide to read aloud, and it awaits the dead. So at first I was thinking this was a zombie movie and was kind of surprised when it got recommended for possession. But I am here to say this is not a zombie movie. I know this is kind of a classic horror movie and a favorite among a lot of people, but it was not for me. It didn't do anything for me. There's like basically a rape scene, which I just, you know, it's not needed for the freaking storyline. Like, why is it in there? And some of the character decisions were just freaking stupid. Like, oh, it just drives me nuts. It was pretty graphic and gory, and with it being an older movie, you know, those graphic scenes just were not very scary. I think it was trying to be over the top, and it certainly was. The Omen is about a couple who adopt a child after their own is stillborn, but the child they adopt is just not right. So I was pretty surprised with this. It was creepier than I thought it would be. I also liked the dog as part of the character. You know, you think of hell, right? And demons and hellhounds are a big part of that. But not a lot of movies, like, take that route or make that a character. So I thought that was really cool. And now I will also say, though, this was recommended as possession, but the actual possession part was pretty light. I think I would almost stick this, or I could see if it was stuck in, like, the Devil in Hell category. However, Damien does kind of have all of the classic possession signs. So, I don't know. It's a tough one. But it was still good. It is an older movie and one that, like, I've heard about. And I actually own an album of the soundtrack. But I just have never seen the movie. So, glad I finally get to cross this one off my list. Next, I watched The Right, which is the movie adaptation from the Right book that I discussed earlier. So the movie follows Father Gary Thomas, who's, like I mentioned, kind of on this journey to be an ordained exorcist. And he goes to learn from Father Lucas, who is kind of this well-known figure in the exorcism community. So I would say this loosely followed the book. And I actually liked the movie better than the book. Of course, it had Anthony Hopkins in it, so he did a fantastic job at being possessed. And, Hannibal Lecter possessed, like, can you imagine how terrifying that is? Yeah, it was pretty good. And the last movie I have is The Exorcism of Molly Hartley. So Molly is accused of murder and confined to a mental institution where she becomes possessed by a demon. At the mental institution is a defunct priest who comes to her aid. So this doesn't get very good reviews, but I actually kind of liked it. I thought the perspective of this, like, all occurring in a mental institution was good. Kind of adds to that confined, trapped feeling. And again, plays with that, theme that I talked about earlier, where it's like, is she really possessed? Is it like a mental thing? She has this effect on the other patients. And of course, they're acting crazy, which is such a horrible word to say, but where you would almost expect that in a mental institution, So, that was pretty good. I will say, though, I hated the graphics of her when she becomes fully possessed, like her facial features and all of that. It just looked, I don't know, childish or something. So that wasn't great for me, but I liked everything, like, leading up to that point. So that's it for the movies that I watched. Let's get into my recommendations. First, we'll chat about my book recommendations. I have 4 of them. The Case Against Satan by Ray Russell is about Susan, who is a young high schooler who becomes possessed by a demon. The family calls in Father Gregory Sargent, who is tasked with ridding her of her evil. So, I will say that this has been dubbed, like, the first Exorcist. It was actually written before William Blatty's famous book. And I think his book kind of obviously follows a similar storyline. However, I think the actual possession is kind of more of a backseat and focuses on kind of the young priest and his own kind of internal struggle with his faith. And it takes more of a storyline of, like, is it possession or is it not? Which obviously makes for a very interesting read. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix is about Gretchen, who begins to act strange, and Abby, Gretchen's best friend, decides it's up to her to save her friend. What a great book. I loved the dynamic between the two friends and loved, how strong their friendship is, and I think that plays a major role in, her saving her friend. And of course, this was set in the 80s, so there's also a lot of very good pop culture references. I would say if you're looking for more of like a fun type of possession book, definitely check this one out. Next is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, which is about Marjorie, who begins to, show signs of schizophrenia. And the medical doctors are kind of at a loss to explain anything and decide they kind of can't really do anything to help. So her parents turn to the church. And with money problems, they find themselves, kind of stars of this reality TV show who have come to their home to document, the turn of events. It's not an overly graphic book, but it definitely plays on this kind of dread and just disturbing atmosphere kind of looming throughout the book. And, with it being like a TV show, it has a little bit of that epistolary form. You read like transcripts and, they kind of talk about like what they see on the film. And it's I would say it's a very good possession book because it's not overly obvious and in your face, but you still kind of gather what's going on. So definitely a good recommendation, I would say. And lastly, I have The Exorcist by William Blatty. I mean, I can't not recommend this. So I think at this point we kind of all know what it's about, but this is about a single mother desperate to save her daughter Reagan from a demon. I'm sure at this point also a lot of you have probably seen the movie, but if you have not read the book, I would recommend the book. William Blatty's writing certainly gets the tone of the book just right, and I would venture to say that the book is even more creepy than the movie. Let's run through my movie recommendations. First is The Taking of Deborah Logan, which is a found footage type of film about a medical student crew coming to live with Deborah Logan and her daughter and documents the kind of effects and how she lives with Alzheimer's. But they soon realize that something else has taken a hold of Deborah. This movie genuinely scared me. It's a good mix of, this kind of horrifying disease with something demonic. It just made the movie. And I don't think it would have had the same effects if it wasn't in found footage form. Next is The Possession, which is about M, who becomes obsessed with an antique box that she got from a yard sale. And as M kind of becomes unstable, her family soon realizes that she's possessed. This is probably one of my all-time favorite possession movies. I like how she became possessed. It's unique in that aspect. And I also like that the type of possession and those that come to her aid is not Catholic. There's a lot of religions and cultures who believe in possession and perform exorcism, but I think it's really rarely seen in books and movies. Most of the time it's people turning to the Catholic Church for help. But this is one exception. It's actually got a Jewish culture background, which was really interesting. And the exorcism that they performed was powerful and creepy as hell. So yeah, very, very good possession movie. The Exorcist is the next movie. I mean, I recommended the book, so I can't not recommend the movie. You know, it's a classic for a reason. And I think for an older movie, the graphics were so good and spot on. This is actually one of the first possession movies that I've ever watched. And lastly, I have Exorcist: The Beginning. I kind of cheated by including 2 movies from the Exorcist franchise, but trust me, it's for good reason. This movie is supposed to be set like before the original Exorcist movies, and the older priest that comes to aid Regan in the original Exorcist movie is Father Merrin. So Exorcist: The Beginning kind of follows Father Merrin in his younger years and kind of how he first performed his exorcism. And yeah, it's one of my favorite of all the Exorcist movies, and some of these scenes are truly horrifying. I actually watched this with my mom, and she said it was one of the scariest movies she's seen. So that's all I have for this video. I had a blast reading Possession and Horror this month. It's one of my go-to movies, but I actually don't pick up a lot of possession in books. So that was a nice opportunity to do that here. And I definitely have picked up some other possession books that are on my shelf, so that'll be enjoyable to get to when I get a chance. Also look forward to April, because it's all about Devil, Demon, and Hell, which I am super excited about. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite possession book and or movies are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.